Welcome to the podcast.
That was a lot of effort. So, I'm in Sydney. This was the most impromptu setup for a podcast, the most amateur setup for a podcast. But we were having a conversation in the morning about, I don't even know. I think I walked downstairs and, good morning, Dad. By the way,
No, you said something about. I was thinking about things on the way home from on the train last night after meeting up with my very good mate Pete, and you were talking about
that's right.
Gnosticism and Pete gave you a book on Stoicism, and that's where it started.
That's how it started, and then I was explaining how I've been looking at A Course in Miracles, and how that had been like this. Opened up this like connection to God. It's like almost religion stripped away from. It was like Christianity or some God-like connection without all the religious bullshit attached to it.
So, what was A Course in Miracles? Is that a book? Is it?
Yeah, it's called A Course in Miracles. I think it's like the premise of it is like it's like Jesus has dictated this to this person, you know, he's like spoken to them, and then they've written it all down. It's very long, but it's also got like these daily practices, like daily exercises, and the text is pretty like dense. But when I was reading it, I found so much of it was like it brought together a lot of things that I had seen from different kinds of research or understanding that I had from looking at different disciplines, and this like connection with God, which like Catalina had something that was important to her, and that I'd never felt because I was in more like I'd felt a connection to a spirit or something, but because I didn't subscribe to I just found religion and Christianity and all that, like all of the beliefs, the closed-mindedness of it very restrictive to my intellectual curiosity. But then this book is kind of like, it felt almost like this Jesus or whatever you want to call it saying, hey, here's what it's about. And then there's also these daily practices. And the way this started was then I said to Dad that I was comparing this to Gnosticism, which is like, and then that conversation started basically, and we've been talking for about the last half an hour, and we decided while I'm here, why don't we try and record something with the most...
It was a bit different, and we were planning on doing a podcast on a more consistent with the topics that we have been doing, but we thought, well, while you're here, let's do a... Oh, by the way, this is Alfie.
Yes. Hey, Alfie.
Something which is not inconsistent with the way in which Adrian and I have discussed things, and our morning discussions. Actually, this is not
unusual.
This is not unusual. So we were thinking about a different way of doing a podcast, and this just came to be.
Well, I think look, realistically, this was us going. We've been wanting to do that. We've been having these conversations anyway, and it's like we should probably record this. So apologies if the sound quality is not great or the video with the camera is legitimately leaning up against the photo album. I've got my tracksuit pants and socks on, but
and apologise if I've got a bit of bronchitis.
We're both at our best right now. This is definitely the production quality.
But this is really genuine.
This is very genuine.
You couldn't get more genuine and the way we would be in a morning discussion in any event.
So I mean, let's kind of try and go back to what we were talking about, which is a little bit difficult because where we came into it was... Like, I'll just say from my perspective, right? Like, I have always felt a pull towards something more spiritual and something a bit deeper. Like, I never felt that this was it. I mean, maybe when I was very young, I was a bit more atheistic because I never really agreed with the nature of the way that religion was taught in schools, and it was very closed-minded, and they didn't have maybe it was just the nature of the schools that we're in, and we grew up in a Bible Belt, but the whole nature of the philosophy was like, here's the answers, and then if you had questions, it's like there was no answers to those questions. There wasn't an open-mindedness to those things, and as a result of that, I just kind of resisted the teachings of it, because I was like, I don't like the closed-mindedness, I don't like the division, I don't like the separation, and that led to me talking or going more down some of the spiritual roots and meditation and some of the Eastern philosophical concepts. And over many years, like even through my own like some psychedelic drug experiences and deep meditations as well, feeling that this isn't it. There's something more to reality than what we think is physical reality. And then researching into the energetic nature of everything, how it's ultimately all energy, frequency, and vibration, and that physical reality is actually illusory. Probably best summed up in many ways in the Matrix movie. So then I've gone through all these paths, and then but the one thing I would say with that is I always felt like a disconnection with any godlike figure. Okay, it is recording. I'm just double checking to make sure it's recording.
When you mean godlike, you keep going.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll sum it up to say I felt like that path, because it's more focused on you and your own personal journey of discovery. I didn't feel like it was like, maybe I'll call it the universe or something else. But there wasn't then this same framework of teaching which I connected with. And then in recent times, and that's why I brought up this Course in Miracles, which was through, got to that through Catalina, started reading it. It brought together a lot of things, and then I started seeing the similarities with Gnosticism, and I started comparing it with all these other ones, and then suddenly this picture starts emerging of what actually reality is, and that's the subject of today's podcast.
Well, it may be the subject, but it where it goes from in the discussion, as it normally does, we actually don't know where it goes.
That sums up pretty much the nature of reality as well. We don't know.
We don't know.
I guess the one thing I would throw out there, maybe to spark the discussion, because I mean, we did this the other day, looking around this room and the books in the room here, and
this is just the recent purchases in the last year. So
yeah, like I mean, you can't obviously read them and see them from here, but all of the books in here illustrate Dad's search to understand religions and comparison, and how, like, basically what's going on, how we've been lied to, how it all comes together. I'll ask you a question. Why this area? Because I know the mysteries, the conspiracies, the specific things, but then now you're going very deep on religion, and like, why has that captured so much attention, especially in recent times?
Good question. It's not intentional. It's just that it's. I guess the turning point was that book there.
Which one?
There.
Gods of the Bible. This is Gods of the Bible, and I've read that too. This was a book that Dad recommended I read just before I left on my trip. So, Dad, what's the premise of this book?
Firstly, it's written by a guy called an Italian by Mauro Bigloni. Bigloni, yeah.
What is it? Biglino.
Biglino, who is an expert translator in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Coptic, and what have you. And he'd been commissioned many years ago by the Vatican to do a translation of some of the Bibles some of the books of the New Testament, and he was very literal in his interpretation. And the Vatican cancelled the assignment. But he wrote this book, and it's basically his literal interpretation of some of the very key words in the Old Testament. And when you go through and understand and look at his literal interpretation of Yahweh, which is Yahweh. Instead of being a singular God, it is the powerful ones, or it's a plural. It's not a singular. And then there are other words, ruach, which is like a flying machine. And then, so I think I read that about 6 or 7 months ago, maybe the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And so the general theme in answer to your question is that the Old Testament is not actually talking about a singular monotheistic God creator, but that perhaps when you start reading it without, as he says, the religiosity that has been put into the interpretation of the words, and what I mean by religiosity, that is the interpretations put in by the church leaders, and why they wanted to do that is to control the narrative. Control the narrative.
Yeah.
What's happening now? And the narrative is a monotheistic God, and he created everything in 6 days or whatever. That's another interpretation. But Moro comes out and says, well, no, the Yahweh of the Old Testament is actually just one of many powerful ones, and he just happened to be in control of that area of around Egypt and.
So he said,
but I'll go to the main. That's that. But then, who are the powerful ones, and where does all this? So basically, his theme of the conclusion, if you want to call it, is consistent with a proposition put forward by a guy called Zecharia Sitchin in a series of books. Not very well written, but his conveying of the translation of the cuneiform texts, and the cuneiform texts were in Babylon in 3000 BC, and basically we're talking about, drumroll, alien intervention into the DNA of the human body. Mm-hmm. And so, in answer to your question about how did I start going down this path of looking into the various religions and esoteric knowledge around the world, and how they are so many different cultures around the world, and secret societies and philosophies, the Native American Indians, the Mayans, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Norwegian ones, African. There are so many different, Aboriginal, so many similarities in, let's call it, the creation story.
Yeah.
And so that led me down to the path of actually reading another series of books by Paul Wallace, which is just fantastic, which continues to support that. And I'm just starting to read the old Nag Hammadi scriptures, so and exploring the nature of the process. To me, the disconnect between what the major religions have been telling us as to something I explored many years ago. And I did mention to you in our first podcast about how we started with reading the book Chariots of the Gods by Erich von Däniken. Mm. And so, that's
kind of come full circle.
And Erich von Däniken, he was criticised and all of that, but he was probably one of the godfathers. But this is probably the other guy. I just got this one, Charles Fort. I just got this book, and he wrote this book in the early 20th century. So yeah, that's why
So,
I've been
like-
going down that. But I'm reading stuff on Jesus as well. You know,
Yeah.
like what are these messages that are coming out, not just from him, but from other cultures around the world, and sort of it starts to sort of question, who are we? Why are we? Not why are we here, but how do we have our mindset about different things?
And what is this? And I mean, the interesting part is, Alfie, can you stop moving, because your jingling collar is going to be upsetting the audio.
Come here, come on,
Go on. Sorry for the production quality. No,
come on, buddy.
but this is all an illusion anyway. What's interesting to me is the different paths that we've come on to arrive at like a similar area of study. And because like I said, for me, it was more through this spiritual aspect and more inner searching and trying to understand why I had like particular attachments, why I would be triggered by certain things, and what was causing suffering in particular areas of my life. And it was a very inward focused, self-aware, recognizing there's something. So in these states of meditation, I was very into Stoicism as well. So like
Do you want to explain that?
so Stoicism is a philosophical practice, probably best known through the teachings of, I wouldn't even call it teaching. So Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor of Rome, there is a book by him, I say by, called Meditations, because ultimately it's the journal of Marcus Aurelius. And it's pretty wild to have the journal of a Roman emperor. And then within that is him wrestling with these moral themes of how to be a good person, how to be a better person. But ultimately Stoicism, and I might butcher this, so to take it as you will, but my interpretation of it is that there is a difference between what happens and then your reaction to what happens. And there's things you can control and things you can't control. External things a lot of the time are outside of your control. But one thing that's always in your control is how you perceive those things. And at a fundamental level, that for me was like such a practical, philosophical teaching that you can apply to life. And then through that path, there is a certain recognition that I would get to of like, well, why am I reacting to this thing in this way?
Yep.
What is it about this that triggers me in so strongly? And through the more meditative practices, a big part of that is creating separation between the thoughts and your reactions to. So you witness the thoughts, you observe the thoughts.
Yep.
And then I start seeing similarities of like, okay, well, that's kind of the same thing in a way. It's saying, if I can choose my response to something, first I have to recognize that those thoughts aren't who I am. They're just thoughts that I'm having. And then, just general interest and fascination, but it then leads to that path of like, well, okay, well, who am I? And what is because if I am observing my thoughts, quote, and I think I am my thoughts and my thoughts define me, then who is the I that's doing the observing? And then you start getting into these more profound questions about ego, and then naturally for me that then leads into the God question, existence, and also the nature of reality being energy in vibrational frequencies. Energy is all connected, and this is backed by physics. But the implications of that haven't really, like, we sort of acknowledge that, yeah, that's true. Everything at a subatomic level is mostly energy, and it's vibration and frequency.
Vibration.
That we perceive as being physical. But the real implications of that, we're sort of like, we're not ready to actually take into account. Because it's like, that changes everything to go, oh, okay, so we actually are all connected. Everything technically is one. It's all energy, but just in different density.
I think we are all connected.
Same.
I do, and I think, why do I think that we're connected? we will never know, but I do think that there is, and we were talking about that earlier this morning about this our DNA makeup, our genomes, our brain, our capacity of our brain. The number of times people say, "Oh, well, you're only using 10% of your brain," or there's this 80% of your DNA or genomes, or it's irrelevant. It's just superfluous to what you've got. Well,
that's such a crazy idea to me.
No, but that's just like, well,
they call it junk DNA or something.
Yes, it's junk DNA.
That's such a wild thought, though, don't you think? To be like, it's such a wildly dismissive thought to go, oh yeah, there's a big percentage of your DNA, it's just junk. It's like, so everything else in the universe seems to work in such symbiosis, and everything is connected, and they all tend to work in ordered systems. But we're just like, this part, nah.
Not just this part, but the majority of the totality is junk.
It's
right?
junk, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So when you're saying connected, it's like, well, where did our DNA come from? And if I continue with this theme of alien intervention, perhaps the DNA that we've got was they gave us part of what they had, and so many of the alien connections, what do they call them? Abductions, where the people have been taken up into the spaceship, or they're staying there. The number of times where one of the consistencies in all of that is the abductee says, they're communicating with me, but they're not talking. And it's a really consistent theme in those stories, and then so many of these stories go back to and there's some books that I've been on, a book of Ezekiel and Enoch and some others, and where and the Old Testament, and when you read about some of these stories about this person is ascended, and I'm there, I'm talking, but I'm listening, right? But they're not actually talking, so they're communicating. It's like this telepathic. So that's where I get this Tony Stewart, Big Tone theory that we're connected because we've been given this power of connection with each other in our DNA. It's part of us.
Well, this is where, and this is like why there's so many dimensions to view this through. Because the dimension I look at it through is if on a fundamental level, at a subatomic level, everything is made of the same fundamental building blocks, then by definition, everything's connected. And we know that thought form, like, as an example, people are willing to accept stuff like, athletes visualize something, like the power of visualization. You really focus on it. You can manifest something if you put the work in too, but you can turn a thought into reality. There's been studies done where people visualize themselves doing the activities before it comes into reality. To me, that also suggests that, okay, well, thought is an energetic frequency, and then it's just the level of density of going from a thought to bring it into a reality. That's one thing I wanted to touch on. The other interesting part, which is dogs are podcast friendly. The other thing that I find interesting is, like, you're talking about telepathy and all of these other supposedly woo-woo things that people dismiss, like extrasensory perception and mind reading, or that you get a sense that someone's about to call and they do, and people dismiss those things as ridiculous and implausible.
Coincidences. When
you consider that everything is connected on an energetic level, those things, it's an incredibly simple explanation for. And again, look, I'm not a scientist. I don't know. This is all intuitive.
But an example of this connectedness is the history of twins.
Not the Jesus Christ. Alfie, you being disruptive.
Come here.
No, here, come. Sorry about that. This is one of the. Oh my god. You can't be doing this. Right.
Is there someone at the door?
No.
No. Okay. No. Jesus. Okay. We told you this is raw.
This is authentic. This is raw.
The number of incidences where twins, and I'm talking twins, on the other side of the world, where one twin has suffered a death or a very bad injury, and the other twin on the other side of the world has that feeling. Oh, something's happened to Joe. Well, and it's like they say at this right at this time on the east coast of America, and their twin in England has experienced some trauma, and it's like that.
Yeah,
and that to me is like, how the fuck does that happen?
Well, it happens because, and this to me is the crazy part. Is like, if you look at I'm pretty certain it's pretty close to accepted that at this fundamental level from quantum physics, it's energy, right? It's space and it's energy and frequency. That explains all of that. And again, this is not science, right? So I know that anyone who's very scientifically minded is going to be like, okay,
well,
you're
going into quantum theory.
Yeah.
Which I have no idea about.
Let's not go down that subject because frankly...
But no, seriously, they talk about it. I've tried to understand it. I can't.
I want to go back to... because the core theme that has been going through my head recently... Can you stop trying to escape if you're going to bark? You were talking about people being abducted and they're like, oh, it's communicated to, but they weren't speaking to me. I just felt the communication.
Yeah, it's a common thing.
So language is communication through symbols and sounds, right? The fact that we think in language is actually kind of odd because, and also communication, the fact that we need communication like verbally is because we have 5 senses, right? With that's what we decode the world with is our 5 senses. So as an example, our sense of hearing, we know there is frequencies we can't hear. Our sense of sight, we know that of all visible light, what we can see is like infinitesimally small. I'm not sure how it applies to taste. I'm sure it probably does, but what I'm trying to say is like our senses are so limited for perception that it doesn't mean there's not a whole bunch of other stuff going on. And maybe in this, when they take them out of the physical world and communicate to them, that, well, yeah, it's like, why would we talk to you in words? What a crude form of communication.
Absolutely. And that's how they've been communicating with themselves. They being the aliens, and there's no need for words. There's no need.
Yeah,
it's like there's this coming back to this.
They're connected.
Exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah.
They're connected, and that's what this particular part of the discussion is. We are connected, and I do think that we are connected. I was just going to talk about connectedness between people who are deeply in love.
Yeah,
and the experience of yes, there's a chemical. It's documented that when you're deeply in love, and there's the sexual connection and the if you want to call it the orgasmic experience and all of that. There's a chemical reaction within the body, but even apart from the we'll call it the physical nature, there is a mental thing going on when people are deeply in love, and why that happens, I don't know, but it does happen.
I have a theory on that too, and I think it ties into stuff we've spoken about before with crowds and crowd psychology, right? So, core theme, unity versus separation.
Yep.
Most of the spiritual teachings talk about some form of separation, and that separation is an illusion, and that unity with God or source is everything. And let's assume that that's a foundational element, that our idea of separation is illusory. The reason we like connecting with human beings, especially those who vibrate on our frequency, is because that's a way for us to feel almost an amplified connection to a greater unit.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So when you're vibrating on the same frequency, good vibes with someone.
It's a good, when you hear that expression, good vibes, it's a very...
It tells you a lot about what it
expansive word, isn't it?
Yeah. And
description.
To continue that theme on what you were saying, I feel that we connecting with other human beings who have this, I don't know, we all have that connection to the higher power within us. When you connect with people who are vibrating on a similar level, Alfie's just licking my hand, you feel a greater connection.
That's love.
That's love right there.
Yeah.
And I think there's you can either get that through intensity, and when you're deeply in love with someone, it's like both of those inner souls or spirits, or that's a bit weird now, is... Maybe we won't put the video up yet.
Yeah, it's okay.
The connection, the depth of the connection, the intensity with one person gives you a greater connection to God or what a source or whatever. But then there's also this effect in masses of people where maybe you don't have the same individual level of connection, but you have a greater volume and number of people who are then unified through some kind of music or dance or ideology. So then in a way, that's why it's so intoxicating, because people then, that energy becomes rather than a bunch of separate units of energy of I am Adrian, I am Tony. That's why crowds become a new blob of its own energy, which can then be moved and directed by someone else. So in a way, it's the intensity of one-on-one vibes and frequencies, whether or not because if you're not connected with someone and you're at a different kind of vibration, so to speak, the vibes aren't good, you're nah, you don't feel as good because you're not as connected.
Well,
challenge me. You don't have to agree.
No. I was actually, when you're talking about that group think and all of that, there were two and vibes. Two names came to me. First, it was David Icke, because he talks about vibrations a lot, but I'll just put him aside for the moment. And the other one I want to talk about is a group is Tony Robbins. And the manner in which a motivator like Tony Robbins can influence a very large crowd. Now, I went to a Tony Robbins weekend seminar back in '96, I think it was, when he was here in Sydney, and it's very, very intense. And the Friday night, the afternoon, you started about 2 o'clock or something, and he says, I don't want you to eat or anything. So, and then comes about dinner time, they give you I think it was just a juice and something, or don't eat much, right? So you sort of, you're a bit depleted. Mm-hmm. But the way in which he was, and this is, was able to bring the crowd up with his speech and music, and then bring it down and then up, and then getting people to talk to each other and all of that. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and I still think about its vibrations. The whole thing is about getting people's, and the music, and the tone of the music, the tone of his voice, and it's
a vibration too. Sound is a vibration.
Exactly, and the way in which he would be moving across the stage and his hand movements and the whole thing. And I'm not diminishing it. It was very effective, and I know a lot of people over the course of the weekend were very positively influenced by it. But comes the part of the evening on the Friday night, And he says, "Oh, well, we're going to go out and walk across the coals."
Yeah.
At which I'm looking at, and we're all partnered off, you know, and I'm looking around at the faces of all these people, and they're literally, their eyes are like bulging out like this, and I'm thinking, why am I not like this?
You're narrower.
Okay, we've got to get into
We can't.
Now the point I'm raising all. So I didn't walk across the coals because I can't get this mind control stuff. It didn't work on me, but I got a lot out of it. But the point I'm making about that is the ability of to use vibrations. David Icke, I think you've probably read more about David Icke and his view on all of this than I have.
Well, I think a big part of it is like trying to find an analogy that makes sense to people. And like you can go into a room, I'm sure everyone's had this experience before, where you go into a room and it's like just the atmosphere feels off. And maybe some people are more attuned to it than others. And maybe you could say, all right, that's just people's body language or whatever. But there's certain times that, and it actually, there's a book that I read called Left of Bang, which is by a guy called Jason Van Horn and Patrick Van Horn and Jason someone. Anyway, they developed this program for the Marines, which was about building situational awareness, because they recognize that in the modern warfare environment, it's not as clear who the enemy is. Like a lot of the time they're in their cities, they don't understand who they actually are fighting. So they needed a new system and language to codify situational awareness. I won't go through all of it, but there's about like 6 dimensions. Some of it is about like proxemics. So the way, like the closeness of people can indicate the levels of authority, body language, like just those sorts of things. The one that was interesting though is what they called atmospherics, which is ultimately, the description of that was basically the collective, and it's, said in, I guess, military terms, they're not saying vibes, but the collective mindsets and attitudes in an environment, you can feel if something's off. And they tried to codify a certain language for it, which I don't have off the top of my head, but atmospheres of crowds can change quickly. And it's not like, so what is it that suddenly everyone feels different? Why do we all suddenly feel a certain way?
Well, it can either be externally or internally produced.
Or they're both the same.
No, externally could be someone on a stage, everything's okay on a stage until someone comes onto the stage and starts being negative. Everything's positive.
Yeah, there's a fear energy.
And then someone comes on the stage and sort of like, why is that person here? Oh, he's here to sort of give it. And then, but the initial reaction is, oh, like that.
Yeah, and then you amplify that across that amount of people, and then there's like a collective energy that changes. Yes. Because if everyone's having a great time and then suddenly something bad happens and people aren't having a great time, and that whole, I mean, even like, I'll use another example in management, in businesses. If you have a toxic person in the business who's always complaining and bitching and moaning, and they create a bad energy. I used to work in my first job out of uni. Remember when I was like cold selling American Express credit cards, commission only in shopping centres.
And at the airport.
No, I wasn't at the airport, but I had to go all around Sydney. I had to get like a bus. So anyway, you go to these morning meetings, and it was super culty, because it had to be, because it was such a mindset game. But they would like get you in this room, and then the whole thing was like almost Tony Robbins-esque, where they're trying to pump you up and like celebrating, and there's like a bell ringing thing, and it works, and you're getting, the collective energy is good. And then you leave and you have to get on a fucking bus out to Manly for like 45 minutes to go stand in Warringah Mall trying to sell credit cards to people. And the energy, as soon as you go out of that like controlled space, changes, because like suddenly you're back out in the world.
So why wouldn't See, that to me is a deficiency in the. If you're going to try and motivate someone, what's the point of that? What's the point of doing that? Because you experienced it. Everyone else in that room would have experienced exactly the same thing.
Well, but it did plant a seed that worked in a way.
So if you do it every day,
and then culturally, what would happen is like, so the people that have been there longer too, you'd be in the day, and because like it's a pretty shit job, and you're trying to like stop people in the middle of their day to try and get them to sign up for a credit card and give you all your personal information.
But
I
actually,
I just want to finish that. If you start like, getting a bit negative, they would say, oh, you're negging out. So it was like the whole attitude of like, you're bringing a negative mindset to this. So, but I just want to tie it all back to the energy thing. So if my mindset is negative, why does that affect other people?
Because it's connected.
Because it's connected. Exactly.
So, you can just... you mentioned something about going into a room or you meet someone. And I've experienced this a lot. And I learned that one should not be prejudicial.
Yeah.
Over time, because I've got it wrong. But there are a lot of times I've got it right, where I've met someone or in a meeting or in a social gathering, and I instantly go, oh, there's something, what is it about that? I don't know what it is. There's that feeling or something.
Yeah, something's off.
There's something off. And I've read a book on, it's not vibrations, it's actually smell. It's called the Jacob's organ, which is in the nose. And
of course you have.
What?
Of course you've read a book on smell. Through what research period was that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
I'm just picturing Amazon looking at your order history, being like, this is an interesting guy. He's going through a phase now.
Well, no, a lot of my books up there, I've bought, traveling the world, and just books come out at you. But I'm just saying, there's that, but there's also, we're still on this theme of connectedness.
Yeah.
And connectedness can work both, like, yes, positive, but it's also, as we were talking about earlier, negative. Mm. And it's like, we've all experienced it. We've all experienced that just there's that moment with the crowd, but also with just people, and you might be sitting down having a cup of coffee with them or having a drink, and you're in a group of like 2 or 3 people. And as I say, I've learnt not to prejudge people, but then there's also this thing that we should also recognise. It's instinct. What is
instinct?
Yeah, exactly. What is instinct?
So there's some theories on instinct. There's a book I read a while ago called Sources of Power by a guy called Gary Klein. And it's been a while since I've read it, so I might get this wrong. But he interviewed a lot of experts in their field, whether they were like people with a lot of experience, like firefighters, people in the military. Because he was trying to understand how is it that some people can sense something's about to go wrong, and this is less of an energetic view of it, but it was explaining that instinct in this context comes through experience, though. Like, I think it was recognition primed decision making might have been the term they used, of like people who are very experienced in something, they feel like they haven't, I just knew that something was wrong. They don't know why it was wrong, but deeper down, it's like when interviewed about it, they recognize that they saw that this one thing was out of place, that they knew that this was out of place because of all this experience. That to me it's a bit different to intuition, though, or instinct. So I don't know where I'm going with this.
No, I think I know there's experiential, which gives you an insight into a situation. But there's also situations where you're in a discussion, you're in a meeting or something in a discussion, and a thought comes into your head, and then you mouth that thought.
Yes, it happens often.
No, but sort of like, where did that come from? And there are times where, yes, experiential because something's in your head, but there are times where, and I was talking to our chiropractor about this, and he was saying, yeah, he's experienced the same thing, whereas like, but I think there's, digressing a little bit, you have a body of information in your head, and somehow this thing, this brain, is in an instant, can connect so many of it, and without you even really thinking about it, it's like from here to here to here, and it's out.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, if you had to think about your thoughts, we're already trapped enough as it is, that layer of thinking about thoughts and analysis would be absolutely crippling. How long have we been going for? I'm getting hungry.
I can still.
Sorry, you got some more stuff.
No, I just wanted to talk about. You said earlier, you don't know how you went down this journey, or you don't. It's just like, and you've read today. You've just sort of mentioned about 10 different books, which I haven't read.
Yeah,
and I've read a whole heap of different things. But what's very interesting is that we have not sat down as such and said, and you said, "Oh, Dad, you've read a lot. I think I should read a lot." I haven't. And I think it should be. It's not. It might be. Oh, I've seen Dad do this, but it's not. Oh, I've got to do it because that's what he's done. It's you've been on your own journey of discovery, which I find interesting.
It's a curiosity in general, and that's the thing that, like, the people that I have the most extensive, expansive conversations with are just insatiably curious, and because you follow threads. And I was talking about this with a friend the other day, with Zach, and I mean, every conversation has to be abandoned at some point versus not coming to a natural end, because it would continue forever. Because it's like you explore one subject and then, this is maybe you're talking about economics or something, and how or behavioral economics and how people make decisions, and then then for some reason you get interested in some other subject that's related to that, and after a while he actually made an interesting point, saying he was reading Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is from Charlie Munger, like one of the great investors.
Yeah. Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah.
He was the offsider to
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett.
Yeah. And he was saying in this book, he talks about having these mental models, or I consider it schemas of a lot of different things. So let's say that you research a whole bunch about, to go back to where we started, about the nature of the universe, spirituality, existence, why we're all here. You've read all that, and then you almost break that down into a shorthand model of this is kind of core principles, first principles of this thing. Strip away everything else. It's just, this is kind of my working model for how this works. But then you have a similar approach to a whole bunch of different disciplines, just because you're interested in them, whatever it is. Maybe it's geopolitics or whatever. What are the core principles of geopolitics that have influenced the world, or war, military strategy, or I don't know, empathetic communication, whatever those things are. You kind of take these core points, and then there's the curious mind then goes, how do I connect these different models? And because the simplicity of the model, yes, you might lose detail, but it allows you to then find interesting connections between disparate themes, which can lead to very innovative outcomes when people take an idea from somewhere. I don't know, maybe there's a biologist that goes into an economic environment and sees this is actually the cell.
I think it was Charlie Munger, it wasn't Warren Buffett, who said, "I'd rather be an expert generalist than an expert in one thing."
Yeah.
And I think that describes what you're talking about there. Is, and I would say that is probably a description which is very appropriate for you and I, is that I can't say that I'm an expert in anything. And I have not done the research of anything. I've read a hell of a lot on so many different topics. I'm not an expert in anything other than, well, I can't say other than I look at things similar to what Charlie Munger is saying there and trying to connect all it.
Well, yeah, it's
connecting dots or seeing similarities and sort of like. But the other thing that I also like to see is particularly as it relates to our current world, is trend lines.
Yeah,
and trajectories and all of that. And I think that's a part of the Charlie Munger thing as well.
Well, I think like if I was to just wrap it up, ultimately, it's like simplicity of it's the skeleton versus everything that goes on to the skeleton, right? So once you understand, okay, I might see the structure and outline of something. I don't know every little detail. I don't know every color or how it all works, but. And I found this because I've worked in agencies, like marketing agencies a lot and doing strategy, and part of that, because you're dealing with a lot of different types of businesses in different contexts, you don't have the capacity to take in every bit of detail. You have to find patterns and structures.
Correct. Yep.
And have these operating models. And then by seeing all these different industries, people are like, yeah, but did you know much about this industry? It's like, no, but I know the structure of these things, and you can help bring the specifics for the project. But when you just get the mechanics of all those things, you get sketches of how everything kind of works.
Which is very relevant to what you do, because you're dealing with so many different types of industries and products and the messages and everything. But amongst so many of the things, there are commonalities.
Absolutely, and you have to find them,
and you see them. You've got to find them, but
you see, you do. You see them.
You see them,
and it's a breadth versus depth conversation, right? Because the nature of what I do, I could not do that at the same level of depth. Or you do depth, but it's like a temporary depth.
Yeah,
and the whole nature of it is finding what's most relevant. Like, what are the strategic levers here? What are the things that are going to make the biggest difference? Don't jump on the laptop. And like, what's most important here, and then what is sort of nice but a little bit superfluous. And I think that line of thinking is how I apply to learning, of what are the core principles here that are going to have the biggest impact, and then what stuff is like nice and good and interesting to know, but like I don't need to know at that same level to really grasp it. Like for me, it was always I want to understand the core and the spokes and everything else around it.
But you do need to, for me, I do need to read some of the, there's some very, very, some books that are very, very deep and in information.
Yeah.
I do read them. Can I remember everything that's coming out? God, no way. But what I'm doing is I'm getting themes out of it all the time. Just probably before we finish, there's a word you used earlier, which I find to be one of the most important words as to how people can and why and whatever move down paths, and that's curiosity.
Yeah.
Where does curiosity come from? We're born with curiosity. Every single child that's born is sort of like waking up, but moving around and looking around. But for another day is when children are born. Some are more curious than others, and why that happens is for another story. But do you think that you've always been curious, or your curiousness has got more and more, and why that's happened?
If you're curious to know more about the answer to that question, we can explore that in the next podcast.
And I think that's the signal that not only is Adrian very, very hungry, I'm hungry, but more importantly, Alfie boy, come here. This little man here
He's got to have his breakfast too.
He's very hungry as well. And this is a sign off from Big Tone and his chosen son and our chosen dog, Alfie. See you later. Bye.
Bye.